Welcome back, guys. After broadcast receivers, let's have a look into services, which is our third key component in our Android application. So when do we have to deal with services? In our mobile application, we sometimes have to handle a lot of stuff. For example, in our game, we have to render all those graphics, keep track about those objects and things like this. Beside games, we might have to handle, for example, network requests or playing music, file interaction, complex operations, things like this. All of them require a little bit of time, and this is the problem. For example, if you're trying to make a network request in the main activity, so within the onCreate method, then we have to wait until this network request has been finished, and this might take a while. The problem right now is the application becomes unresponsive, let's say for 2, 3 or 4 seconds. And this is something the Android system doesn't accept. And so after blocking the main UI thread, our activity thread, for a certain amount of time, the Android system is going to terminate our application. So if the operation simply takes too long, the Android core system is closing our application. And this is something, of course, we do not want to have. The Android system doesn't want to have applications that block the UI thread, and we don't want to have applications that's being closed. The solution for this one are services, because they run in the background. They are not blocking the UI thread, and therefore they can be used for time-consuming tasks. For example, like playing music or making some network requests. And generally speaking, we've got two types of services. The first one is the start service, and this is the most common approach, like we would have assumed it. We simply start our service, the service is performing some task, and then the service gets closed. For example, playing a music file, making a network request, things like this. Okay, this is a start service. Beside this, we're also having bound service, and now it's getting a little bit complex, but don't worry, not too complex. So in bound service is binding clients to the service, which means we could have other applications interacting with our service right now. The concept, this is pretty awesome that things like this are possible, but it is also a little bit tricky because those clients are being bound to our service, they can interact with this one, but we have now to wait until every client disconnects from our service until it gets shut down. Okay, so these are our two services. We've got a start service method and we've got an onBind method. These are the main methods regarding to these two services. All right. The downside of a service is we cannot make a UI update. This is not possible because, as already mentioned, the service is running in the background and it has no connection to our main UI thread. Therefore, if you want to perform things like this, we need to use broadcast receivers, but this is perfectly fine. We are already familiar with this one. So, a common service interaction has been the following in the past. We've got our Android application, and this Android application has registered a broadcast receiver to the boot completed broadcast event. So after the smartphone has been finished booting, the smartphone is informing the applications about this event with the boot completed broadcast. Now within our application, we could implement a broadcast receiver, and in the onReceive method, we could start our service, which is polling our server if there are any updates for this app. This means the user doesn't have to open this application. The smartphone has been finished booting, this broadcast event has been triggered, our onReceive method is fetching this event and starting in the background our service, which is connecting is requesting our server regarding to updates. This was a common behavior till Android 8, because then we are not having this background execution being allowed anymore. Okay? So this is pretty awesome because all these Android components can stick together. They can interact with each other and they can perform a lot of interesting things. Also, of course, vulnerable things. Speaking of vulnerability, what do we have to look for in service if you want to attack it? And the answer for this one is already no. At least for the start service. Because the start service, so not the bind service, the start service is being invoked via an intent. And therefore we have to take a look into onStartCommand method, because there we are providing this intent. Once again, we have to figure out which data is being passed into this function and what things we can trigger. Exactly the same like we have seen this in the broadcast receiver example. Alrighty? Okay. Regarding to bind services, it's a little bit more tricky because there we are having a different object. We are having a message object and we have to figure out what is happening with this message object. but I mean, the approach it's pretty identical. On the left, we are dealing with intents, and on the right, we are dealing with a message object. To attack in service, once again, the service has to be exported, and we need to have the permission to interact with this one. If it's using a custom permission, no problem, until the protection level becomes signature. Then we are having a little bit of problem. But unless the protection level is not being set to signature, we might be able to interact with this one if it has been exported. Okay? Perfect. Because this is everything we need to know about the service.